May 1971, Nui Dat Base, South Vietnam. The numbers don't add up. 1,400 patrols, 500 enemy killed, only one Australian SAS death by enemy fire. A kill ratio of 500 to 1 the bars, mathematically impossible by every rule of conventional warfare. Then a female Viet Cong fighter breaks her silence in a 1990s documentary. Her words cut through decades of military analysis. We were not afraid of the American GIs, Australian infantry, or even B-52 bombing. We hated the Australian SAS Rangers because they make Comrades disappear. 580 Australians, more feared than 500,000 Americans. Moving so slowly through the jungle that experienced infiltrators walked straight into their ambushes. The most devastating weapon in this war wasn't superior firepower or advanced technology. It was time itself, turned into something the enemy never saw coming. The war room at Nui Dat Base hummed with the constant chatter of radio traffic and the mechanical clatter of teletype machines. Major Reginald Beasley stood before a wall-mounted map of Phuoc Toi Province, its green expanse dotted with red pins marking enemy contacts. The numbers stared back at him from the daily intelligence summary. 3rd Squadron had logged another successful patrol, bringing their running total to over 1,400 missions since deployment. 512 confirmed enemy killed in action. One SAS trooper lost to enemy fire. Beasley pulled off his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a habit his men had learned to recognize as deep thought in progress. The mathematics were absurd. In conventional warfare, attacking forces typically suffered casualty rates 3 to 1 against defenders. Even elite units operating in hostile territory expected losses. Yet here stood proof that 6-man Australian patrols were achieving kill ratios that defied every textbook written on modern combat. The afternoon intelligence briefing brought fresh confirmation of their impossible success. Captain Morrison spread aerial photographs across the planning table, black and white images of jungle trails and clearings that meant nothing to untrained eyes but told complete stories to men who lived in that green maze. 3 more contacts this week, Morrison reported. Delta Patrol caught a squad moving supplies near the Mae Tao Mountains. 6 enemy KIA, no friendly casualties. Echo Patrol interdicted a courier route southeast of the base. 4 enemy down, intelligence documents recovered. Beasley studied the photographs without comment. Each successful engagement represented hours of meticulous planning, days of patient movement, and seconds of devastating violence. His men moved through the jungle like ghosts, covering perhaps 500 meters in an entire day when stalking enemy positions. American patrols, by contrast, covered 3 to 5 kilometers daily, announcing their presence to anyone within hearing distance. The tactical revolution hadn't emerged from doctrine or training manuals. It had evolved organically during the Borneo campaign of 1965, where Australian SAS learned that jungle warfare rewarded patience over aggression. Moving slowly meant moving silently. Moving silently meant achieving surprise. Achieving surprise meant survival. Lieutenant Davies pushed through the operations center door, still wearing the camouflage cream and torn uniform of a man recently extracted from deep jungle. His patrol had spent 11 days moving through enemy-controlled territory, gathering intelligence on troop movements and supply routes. Davies approached the briefing table and spread his hand-drawn map alongside the aerial photographs. Confirmed VC base camp here, Davies pointed to a spot marked with careful pencil strokes. Approximately 30 personnel, rotating in squads of 8 to 10. They're using this trail system to move supplies from the Saigon corridor. His finger traced a network of thin lines connecting several clearings. We observed 17 separate movements over 4 days. No indication they detected our presence. Beasley nodded. This was how wars were won, not through dramatic firefights that made headlines, but through methodical collection of information that degraded enemy capabilities. Recommendations? Artillery strike would scatter them temporarily, but they'd re-establish somewhere else within a week, Davies replied. Better to maintain surveillance and track their connections to other cells. This appears to be a logistics hub feeding 3 separate operational areas. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Henderson, the task force commander who oversaw all Australian operations in Phuoc Toi Province. Henderson moved with the precise bearing of a career officer who had fought in 3 wars, but his expression carried the weight of a man grappling with tactical success that couldn't translate to strategic victory. "Gentlemen," Henderson addressed the assembled officers, "MACV headquarters wants another briefing on our operational methods. General Abrams is particularly interested in our casualty ratios." He paused, letting the implications settle. "The Americans are losing 40 to 50 men weekly across their area of operations. We're averaging 1 death every 6 months. Beasley understood the subtext. American commanders were desperate to replicate Australian success, but they couldn't grasp the fundamental difference in approach. U.S. doctrine emphasized rapid movement, massive firepower, and quick decisive battles. Australian SAS doctrine emphasized invisible movement, precise intelligence, and carefully chosen engagements where victory was mathematically certain before the first shot was fired. "Sir," Beasley responded carefully, "our methods require extensive jungle experience and unit cohesion that takes years to develop. Most American units rotate personnel every 12 months. Our patrols have been training together for 3 years. Henderson consulted his notes. MACV is establishing something called Recondo School. They want Australian instructors to teach long-range patrol techniques to selected American personnel." He looked directly at Beasley. "They're particularly interested in your communication methods and movement techniques." The request represented both validation and frustration. Australian SAS had proven that small units operating with infinite patience could achieve results that massive conventional forces could not. But those methods couldn't be taught in a 6-week course or implemented by troops who would rotate home before mastering the skills. Davies spoke up from his position near the map table. "Sir, the VC are adapting to our presence. Intelligence reports indicate they're avoiding certain areas entirely. Some trail networks have been abandoned. They're calling us Ma Rung, phantoms of the jungle." Beasley felt a grim satisfaction at this confirmation. Fear was a force multiplier more effective than artillery. When experienced enemy fighters began avoiding territory because of 6-man patrols, those patrols had achieved something beyond tactical success. They had created psychological dominance over an area larger than their physical presence could possibly control. The briefing concluded with assignment of new patrol routes and coordination with helicopter support elements. As officers dispersed to prepare their missions, Beasley remained behind studying the province map. Red pins marked successful contacts scattered across hundreds of square kilometers of jungle. Each pin represented perfect execution of tactics that turned conventional wisdom upside down. Outside the operations center, the late afternoon heat shimmered off the metal roofing of temporary buildings. In 12 hours, his patrols would be moving through darkness toward their assigned areas, beginning another cycle of patient stalking that might last 2 weeks. They would move so slowly that time itself became their primary weapon, achieving positions so perfect that enemy contact meant certain victory. The impossible numbers would continue to accumulate, one ghost-like patrol at a time. The concept that would revolutionize jungle warfare had emerged 3 years earlier in the dense rainforests of Borneo, where Australian SAS first encountered an enemy that melted away from conventional pursuit like mist before sunrise. During the Indonesian confrontation of 1965, Sergeant Bill Mackenzie's patrol had spent 6 days tracking Indonesian infiltrators through terrain so thick that visibility dropped to 5 meters in any direction. Traditional infantry tactics called for aggressive pursuit, rapid movement, and overwhelming the enemy through speed and firepower. Mackenzie tried something different. On the 7th day, instead of continuing the chase, his 4-man patrol simply stopped. They established a position overlooking a game trail and waited. For 18 hours, they remained motionless while Indonesian soldiers passed within 10 meters of their concealed positions. When the enemy patrol returned along the same route the following evening, Mackenzie's men were ready. The contact lasted less than 30 seconds. 4 Indonesian infiltrators died without firing a shot. The lesson was profound. Patience defeated mobility. The tactical doctrine that emerged from Borneo required fundamental changes to equipment and mindset. Standard L1A1 self-loading rifles, designed for conventional battlefield engagement, proved too unwieldy for close-quarters jungle combat. Australian armorers began modifying the weapons, cutting barrel length from 21 inches to 17 and installing 30-round magazines in place of the standard 20. The modified rifles, dubbed the Bitch by soldiers who carried them, fired full automatic with a muzzle blast that sounded like weapons twice their size. Corporal Jimmy Watson hefted his modified L1A1 during pre-deployment training at Canungra, Queensland. The shortened barrel created a distinctive flame signature that made the rifle appear larger and more powerful to enemy observers. "You fire this thing in the dark," Watson explained to newer patrol members, "and Charlie thinks he's facing a .50 caliber machine gun. Psychological warfare starts with the sound of your weapon." The radio equipment presented different challenges. Standard ANPRC-25 sets weighed over 23 pounds with batteries, too heavy for patrols that might operate for 2 weeks without resupply. Australian signals specialists stripped unnecessary components and modified the units for minimum weight while maintaining communication range back to base. Each patrol carried one radio operator whose primary responsibility was maintaining contact with headquarters for intelligence reports and emergency extraction. More revolutionary than equipment modifications was the fundamental change in movement philosophy. Traditional military doctrine emphasized covering ground quickly to maintain operational momentum. Australian SAS developed the opposite approach, moving so slowly that enemy forces would walk into carefully prepared positions. During training exercises, patrols practiced moving 500 meters in an entire day, a pace that seemed absurdly slow to officers trained in conventional tactics. Lieutenant Peter Davies led his first training patrol through the jungle training areas near Canungra, implementing the new doctrine under the watchful eye of experienced NCOs who had survived Borneo. "Every step is deliberate," Sergeant Mackenzie instructed as Davies' patrol crept through dense undergrowth. "You're not trying to get somewhere quickly. You're trying to become part of the jungle itself." The psychological impact on enemy forces became apparent during the first Vietnam deployments. Viet Cong fighters, accustomed to detecting approaching Australian infantry from hundreds of meters away, found themselves unable to locate SAS patrols until contact was inevitable. Intelligence reports from captured documents revealed enemy confusion about Australian troop strength and capabilities. References to phantom soldiers and invisible attackers began appearing in VC communications intercepts. Radio communication between patrol members presented another innovation. Traditional military communication relied on voice transmissions that could be intercepted or detected by enemy monitoring equipment. Australian SAS developed a system using fishing lines stretched between patrol members' positions, allowing silent communication through gentle tugs that conveyed predetermined messages. One tug meant enemy approaching. 2 tugs meant prepare for contact. 3 tugs meant withdraw immediately. The insertion method proved equally critical to operational success. UH-1 Iroquois helicopters from Royal Australian Air Force 9 Squadron perfected treetop-level approaches that deposited patrols without the distinctive rotor noise that typically announced helicopter operations to enemy observers within several kilometers. Pilots flew between jungle canopy and hilltops, using terrain masking to approach landing zones undetected. The technique required exceptional flying skill and intimate knowledge of local geography. Flight Lieutenant Morrison pulled his Iroquois into a steep approach toward a narrow clearing barely large enough for landing. His crew chief monitored radio frequencies for enemy transmissions, while door gunners scanned the jungle for muzzle flashes or movement. The entire insertion process took less than 15 seconds from touchdown to departure, leaving 4 SAS soldiers alone in territory controlled by an estimated 2 companies of Viet Cong regulars. The tactical revolution extended to engagement procedures that maximized psychological impact while minimizing friendly casualties. Instead of calling for artillery support or airstrikes when enemy contact occurred, SAS patrols relied on devastating initial bursts of automatic fire that created the impression of much larger forces. The modified L1A1 rifles firing full automatic from concealed positions generated sound signatures that enemy forces associated with company-strength ambushes rather than 6-man patrols. During the daily pack time period between 1100 and 1500 hours, when tropical heat made movement nearly unbearable, patrols established static positions and conducted detailed surveillance of enemy activity. This 4-hour observation window often provided more valuable intelligence than weeks of conventional patrolling. Enemy forces, believing the jungle empty during the hottest part of the day, moved openly along trails and gathered in clearings that SAS observers carefully mapped for future reference. The doctrine's effectiveness became measurable through enemy behavioral changes documented in intelligence reports. Trail networks that had supported regular Viet Cong movement for years were suddenly abandoned. Supply routes were rerouted through longer, more difficult terrain to avoid areas where SAS patrols operated. Most significantly, enemy forces began moving in larger groups for protection, making them more vulnerable to detection by aerial surveillance and conventional ground forces. The Phantom Doctrine transformed six-man patrols into force multipliers capable of controlling territory far beyond their physical presence, proving that in jungle warfare, invisible patience defeated visible aggression every time. The first major test of the Phantom Doctrine came during a sweltering July morning in 1966 when Corporal Jimmy Watson's patrol detected movement along a well-used trail 3 kilometers northeast of Nui Dat Base. Through the dense undergrowth, Watson observed 8 Viet Cong soldiers moving in single file, each carrying an AK-47 rifle and a canvas pack that suggested a resupply mission. Traditional tactics would have called for immediate engagement or radio coordination with artillery support. Watson chose patience. His 4-man patrol had been in position for 36 hours, watching this particular trail junction where intelligence reports suggested regular enemy movement occurred during early morning hours. The VC soldiers passed within 15 meters of the concealed Australian positions, their conversation audible through the jungle stillness. Watson's team remained motionless, tracking the enemy movement through hand signals and the fishing line communication system they had perfected during training. 6 hours later, the same VC patrol returned along the identical route, now carrying additional supplies that indicated successful contact with a logistics cache somewhere to the northeast. This time, Watson was ready. His patrol had repositioned during the intervening hours, establishing interlocking fields of fire that would prevent enemy escape while creating the acoustic signature of a much larger force. When the lead VC soldier reached a predetermined point marked by a distinctive tree, Watson initiated contact. The engagement lasted 18 seconds. 4 modified L1A1 rifles firing full automatic from concealed positions created a wall of sound that reverberated through the jungle canopy. The muzzle blasts from shortened barrels produced flame signatures visible even in daylight, convincing surviving enemy soldiers that they faced heavy machine gun positions rather than individual rifles. 8 VC soldiers died without returning effective fire. Watson's patrol suffered no casualties. More significantly, the psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate tactical result. Within 72 hours, intelligence intercepts revealed that local VC commanders were reporting attacks by Phantom soldiers who appeared without warning and disappeared before counterattack was possible. The term Ma Rung began appearing in captured documents, describing Australian forces as jungle ghosts who materialized from thin air to deliver devastating ambushes. Lieutenant Davies led another patrol that demonstrated the doctrine's intelligence-gathering potential during a 2-week operation in the Mae Tao Mountains. Instead of seeking contact with enemy forces, Davies focused on observation and documentation of VC movement patterns. His patrol established a series of concealed observation posts overlooking known infiltration routes, recording detailed information about enemy troop strength, equipment, and timing. Over 14 days, Davies documented 47 separate enemy movements totaling over 200 individual soldiers. His hand-drawn maps identified 3 previously unknown base camps, 2 ammunition storage sites, and a communications relay station that coordinated VC operations across Phuoc Tuy Province. The intelligence value of this single patrol exceeded the tactical results of dozens of conventional search and destroy missions. The hardware modifications proved their worth during increasingly frequent contacts throughout 1967. Private Thompson's patrol engaged a VC squad near the village of Bin Ba, using the full range of specialized equipment that Australian armorers had developed. Thompson carried an M16A1 rifle fitted with an XM148 grenade launcher, providing both precision rifle fire and area effect capability against enemy positions behind cover. Sergeant Clark deployed a Sterling submachine gun equipped with a suppressor, allowing silent elimination of enemy sentries before the main engagement began. The suppressed Sterling fired 9mm paracetam rounds that produced minimal muzzle flash and sound signature, enabling Clark to neutralize 2 VC soldiers without alerting their companions 50 meters away. The patrol's radio operator maintained continuous communication with the Tactical Operations Center using the modified ANPRC-25 set that weighed 8 pounds less than standard equipment. When contact occurred, he immediately transmitted detailed position reports and enemy strength estimates that allowed helicopter extraction within 20 minutes of the first shots fired. By mid-1967, the cumulative effect of Phantom Doctrine operations had fundamentally altered enemy behavior patterns across the Australian area of responsibility. Intelligence analysts documented a 30% reduction in VC movement during daylight hours and a complete cessation of large unit operations within 5 kilometers of known SAS patrol areas. Enemy forces began traveling in groups of 15 to 20 soldiers for mutual protection, making them more vulnerable to detection by conventional Australian infantry units. The success attracted attention from American military commanders struggling with mounting casualties throughout their areas of operation. Major General Fred Wyand, commanding the 25th Infantry Division, requested detailed briefings on Australian tactics and equipment modifications. The Military Assistance Command Vietnam established the Recondo School at Nha Trang specifically to teach long-range patrol techniques to selected American personnel, using Australian instructors to demonstrate the Phantom Doctrine principles. Captain Morrison found himself training American Rangers in the fundamentals of invisible movement and patient observation. The cultural differences proved challenging to overcome. American soldiers, trained in rapid decisive action and overwhelming firepower, struggled with the concept of remaining motionless for hours while enemy forces moved nearby. "You're not hunting deer," Morrison explained to a class of frustrated Rangers. "You're becoming part of the forest until the deer walks into your living room." The tactical evolution reached its peak during Operation Coburg in 1968, when SAS patrols provided intelligence coordination for the entire 1st Australian Task Force. 18 separate patrols operating throughout Phuoc Tuy Province created a comprehensive picture of enemy activity that allowed conventional forces to achieve maximum effectiveness. Artillery strikes, infantry sweeps, and air mobile operations were precisely coordinated based on intelligence gathered by invisible observers who had been watching enemy movements for days. The statistical results spoke to revolutionary tactical success that transcended conventional military measurements. During 1967 alone, Australian SAS conducted 298 separate contacts with enemy forces, achieving confirmed kills that exceeded 500 while suffering fewer than 30 wounded. No SAS soldier was killed by enemy fire during the entire year. The Phantom Doctrine had transformed jungle warfare from a contest of movement and firepower into a chess match where patience and position determined victory, proving that 6 invisible soldiers could control more territory than 6,000 visible ones. The system reached mathematical perfection during the Mae Tau Mountains operations of early 1968, where every element of Australian SAS capability synchronized into a precision instrument of warfare that bordered on the supernatural. Lieutenant Colonel Henderson studied the operational planning maps spread across his desk at Nui Dat, calculating helicopter flight times, artillery ranges, and extraction routes with the methodical precision of an engineer designing a bridge. Each patrol insertion point had been selected not just for tactical advantage, but for geometric relationships that allowed mutual support and guaranteed extraction under fire. Flight Lieutenant Morrison's UH-1 Iroquois lifted off from the forward operating base at 0430 hours, carrying Davies's 6-man patrol toward a landing zone designated Alpha 7, located precisely 11.3 kilometers from the nearest artillery battery. The mathematical precision was deliberate. 11 kilometers represented the maximum effective range of the 105mm howitzers that provided fire support for deep penetration patrols. Every meter beyond that distance moved the patrol outside the protective umbrella that could deliver high-explosive shells within 3 minutes of a radio call. Morrison's approach to Alpha 7 demonstrated the integration between 9 Squadron RRAAF and SAS ground operations that had evolved through hundreds of insertion missions. His Iroquois descended through morning mist at treetop level, following a flight path that used ridgelines and valley floors to mask the helicopter's approach from enemy observation posts. The crew chief monitored radio frequencies for enemy transmissions, while door gunners tracked potential threats through night vision equipment that revealed heat signatures invisible to naked eyes. The insertion took 12 seconds. Davies' patrol leaped from the helicopter before full touchdown, disappearing into jungle undergrowth while Morrison's aircraft climbed rapidly toward base, following a different route to prevent enemy forces from determining the patrol's location through sound triangulation. Within minutes, Davies had established radio contact using the coded brevity system that reduced transmission time to absolute minimum. Sunray Minor, this is Delta 47. Insertion complete. No compromise. Out. The patrol's mission exemplified the mathematical precision that made SAS operations successful when larger forces failed. Intelligence reports indicated that a VC logistics network operated through the Mae Tao region, moving supplies from Cambodian sanctuaries toward operational areas near Saigon. Davies' assignment was surveillance and target identification rather than direct engagement, gathering information that would allow conventional forces to disrupt the entire network rather than attacking individual elements. For 72 hours, the patrol moved through terrain so difficult that conventional infantry would have required a full day to cover the distance SAS soldiers traversed in 4 hours. Davies used a handheld compass and pace counting to navigate through jungle where satellite navigation did not exist, and map accuracy proved unreliable. Each man in the patrol carried responsibility for specific navigation tasks. Point man tracked terrain features. Radio operator maintained position logs. Medic recorded water sources and potential helicopter landing zones. The observation post Davies selected overlooked a trail junction where 3 separate paths converged near a stream crossing. From this position, his patrol could monitor enemy movement along multiple routes while maintaining concealed positions that offered excellent fields of fire if contact became necessary. More importantly, the location provided direct line of sight, communication with the Tactical Operations Center 11 kilometers away, eliminating the need for radio relay stations that might compromise operational security. During the next 6 days, Davies documented enemy activity that revealed the scope and sophistication of the logistics network his patrol had been assigned to investigate. 43 separate movements involved over 300 individual VC soldiers and porters carrying supplies that ranged from ammunition and weapons to medical supplies and radio equipment. The intelligence picture that emerged showed a transportation system capable of supporting regiment-strength operations against South Vietnamese and Allied forces throughout the region. The mathematical precision extended to fire support coordination that turned individual patrols into elements of a larger weapon system. When Davies identified a high-value target, a VC communication station established in a reinforced bunker complex, he transmitted detailed coordinates that allowed artillery planners to calculate firing solutions with surgical accuracy. The target lay exactly 10.7 kilometers from the nearest howitzer battery, well within range for immediate fire support. Captain Williams, commanding the artillery battery supporting Davies' operation, received the fire mission at 14:30 hours on the 6th day of the patrol. The coordinates Davies provided were precise to within 10 meters, allowing Williams to calculate a firing solution that would deliver high explosive shells directly onto the target without endangering friendly forces. The mathematical relationships involved projectile trajectory, wind speed, temperature, and atmospheric pressure, variables that artillery computers processed within minutes to produce firing data accurate enough to drop shells through a basketball hoop at 11 kilometers distance. The fire mission commenced at 1500 hours with adjustment rounds that Davies observed through binoculars from his concealed position 800 meters away. "Shot, over," came the radio transmission from the artillery battery. 22 seconds later, Davies watched the first shell impact 50 meters north of the target. "Right 50, drop 25, fire for effect," he transmitted, using the brevity codes that reduced radio exposure to minimum duration. The target disappeared under a barrage of 18 high-explosive shells delivered with precision that would have been impossible without the mathematical coordination between observation, communication, and fire support systems. Davies confirmed target destruction and transmitted intelligence reports that led to follow-up operations by conventional forces throughout the region. The VC logistics network that had operated successfully for months was effectively eliminated through information gathered by 6 soldiers who remained invisible throughout the entire operation. The extraction demonstrated the same mathematical precision that characterized every aspect of the operation. Morrison's Iroquois approached the designated landing zone at precisely 1700 hours, following predetermined flight paths that avoided known enemy positions while providing minimum exposure time during pickup operations. Davies' patrol reached the extraction point with timing accurate to within 3 minutes of the scheduled rendezvous, carrying intelligence documents and photographic evidence that would guide task force operations for the following month. The perfect synchronization of insertion, observation, fire support, and extraction had transformed 6 individual soldiers into components of a weapon system more effective than conventional battalions, proving that mathematical precision could multiply combat effectiveness beyond all reasonable expectations. The first crack in the perfect system appeared not on the battlefield, but in the political corridors of Canberra, where Prime Minister John Gorton faced mounting pressure from anti-war demonstrations that filled city streets with protesters demanding Australian withdrawal from Vietnam. The tactical success that made SAS operations legendary had become strategically irrelevant as public opinion shifted against continued involvement in what many Australians viewed as an American war that served no clear national interest. Major Beasley received the withdrawal notification during a routine intelligence briefing in September 1971, the typed orders arriving via secure teletype from Defense Headquarters in Russell. 3rd Squadron would cease operations by December 31st, with final extraction scheduled for the first week of January 1972. 5.5 years of tactical innovation, over 1,400 patrols, and casualty ratios that defied military history would end because political mathematics had shifted in ways that battlefield success could not influence. The bitter irony was not lost on officers who had spent years perfecting methods that turned conventional warfare wisdom upside down. Davies studied the operational statistics that summarized their achievement. 512 confirmed enemy killed, 28 SAS wounded, 1 death by enemy fire. The numbers represented tactical dominance so complete that enemy forces had abandoned entire regions rather than face Australian patrols. Yet these same numbers meant nothing to protesters in Melbourne and Sydney who demanded an end to Australian involvement regardless of military effectiveness. Lieutenant Watson led one of the final patrols into the Nui Ti Vai Hills, following intelligence reports of renewed VC activity in areas that had been quiet for months. His 6-man team moved through terrain they knew intimately, following paths that previous patrols had mapped with precision accumulated through years of patient observation. The jungle had become their natural environment, a green maze where they moved with confidence born from understanding every trail, stream, and ridgeline within their area of operations. The contact occurred on the 3rd day when Watson's patrol encountered a reinforced VC squad moving supplies toward base camps near the Cambodian border. The engagement followed familiar patterns: patient observation, precise positioning, devastating initial fire that created acoustic signatures suggesting much larger forces. 8 enemy soldiers died within 15 seconds, their bodies scattered along a trail that would soon return to jungle silence. Watson's men policed the area for intelligence documents, called for helicopter extraction, and departed without leaving evidence of their presence except for enemy casualties. The after-action report Watson filed at Nui.base would join hundreds of similar documents in military archives, bureaucratic records of tactical perfection achieved by soldiers whose innovative methods had redefined special operations warfare. Each report documented engagements where superior patience and positioning defeated numerical superiority and intimate terrain knowledge. Together, they comprised a manual for jungle warfare that would influence military doctrine for decades beyond the Vietnam conflict. Flight Lieutenant Morrison conducted his final insertion mission in late November, carrying a patrol toward the Mae Tao Mountains, where intelligence suggested significant enemy activity remained despite years of SAS operations. His UH-1 Iroquois followed flight paths that had become routine through repetition, approaching landing zones that his crew knew from memory. The mathematical precision of insertion procedures remained unchanged. Treetop approaches, minimum ground time, immediate departure along routes designed to prevent enemy location of patrol positions. The patrol Morrison delivered would spend 2 weeks gathering intelligence that conventional forces would never use. Their detailed observations of enemy movement patterns, supply routes, and base camp locations would fill reports that gathered dust in filing cabinets, while American and South Vietnamese units continued operations using methods that Australian SAS had proven inadequate years earlier. The tactical revolution that began in Borneo jungles would end in Vietnam, its lessons learned too late to influence the broader conflict's outcome. Sergeant Clark prepared his equipment for the final patrol, cleaning weapons that had become extensions of his own capabilities through years of jungle operations. The modified L1A1 bitch rifle had proven its worth through dozens of contacts where shortened barrels and full automatic capability provided decisive advantages over enemy forces armed with standard AK-47s. The Sterling submachine gun with its integral suppressor had eliminated sentries and provided silent killing capability that allowed patrols to operate deep in enemy territory without detection. The psychological impact of Australian withdrawal became apparent through intelligence reports that documented changing enemy behavior patterns. VC commanders who had avoided certain areas for years began probing territories they had abandoned due to fear of phantom attacks. Supply routes that had been rerouted through difficult terrain returned to easier paths that SAS patrols had interdicted regularly. The invisible pressure that kept enemy forces off balance began dissipating as word spread through VC networks that the Ma Rung were departing. Captain Henderson reviewed casualty statistics that told the story of tactical methods so effective they bordered on science fiction. 580 Australian SAS soldiers had served in Vietnam across multiple squadron rotations. Combat deaths numbered fewer than could be counted on one hand. Wounded in action totaled 28, most from accidents rather than enemy fire. The mathematical impossibility of such results had been achieved through patience elevated to the level of military art. The final extraction took place on January 4, 1972, when Morrison's helicopter lifted off from Firebase Charlie carrying the last SAS patrol to leave Vietnamese soil. Below them spread the jungle where Australian soldiers had learned to move like ghosts, achieving tactical dominance through methods that transformed time itself into a weapon. The green canopy stretched toward Cambodia, containing trails and clearings where phantom soldiers had proven that invisible patience defeated visible aggression every time. The war would continue for 3 more years without the soldiers who had achieved the impossible. American forces would maintain their emphasis on rapid movement and overwhelming firepower. South Vietnamese units would struggle with tactics designed for conventional rather than guerrilla warfare. The tactical revolution that could have changed the conflict's outcome departed with 600 men whose methods would live on only in classified reports, and the memories of enemies who had learned to fear soldiers they never saw coming. The revelation came 23 years after the last Australian patrol disappeared into morning mist above Firebase Charlie during a documentary interview conducted in a modest apartment in Ho Chi Minh City. The woman who agreed to speak on camera had fought with Viet Cong forces throughout the war, surviving battles that claimed thousands of her comrades, while American B-52 bombers dropped over 7 million tons of explosives across Indochina. Her weathered hands gestured slowly as she described enemies that had tested her courage in different ways. "We were not afraid of the American GIs," she said, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had learned survival through understanding enemy capabilities better than her own commanders. Their helicopters made much noise. Their soldiers talked loudly and moved in large groups. We could hear them coming from many kilometers away. She paused, lighting a cigarette with fingers that trembled slightly from age rather than emotion. "We were not afraid of Australian infantry either. They fought bravely, but followed patterns we could predict." The interviewer pressed for details about different enemy forces, seeking to understand how experienced VC fighters had evaluated various threats during years of jungle warfare. Her answer about B-52 bombing campaigns revealed the psychological impact of strategic warfare on individual soldiers. "Even B-52 bombing, we could survive. The planes flew too high to see us. We learned to dig deeper bunkers and spread our people across larger areas. Many died, but those who survived knew the bombing would end. Then her expression changed, hardening with remembered fear that decades had not diminished. "But we hated the Australian SAS Rangers because they make comrades disappear." The simple statement carried weight that statistics could not convey, describing tactical effectiveness through the eyes of soldiers who had faced the Phantom Doctrine firsthand. You could not hear them coming. You could not see them in the jungle. Your friends would go on patrol and never return. No sound of fighting, no bodies to recover, they simply vanished. The woman's testimony provided the enemy perspective that validated every impossible statistic in Australian military archives. Her description of losing experienced fighters to invisible ambushes explained why VC commanders had abandoned successful supply routes and altered movement patterns that had worked effectively against other Allied forces. The Rung had achieved something beyond tactical success. They had created psychological dominance that affected enemy behavior across entire provinces. Intelligence analysts studying captured documents from the 1990s discovered references to Australian SAS operations that revealed the extent of enemy awareness and fear. VC tactical manuals included specific warnings about phantom soldiers who could remain hidden for weeks before attacking with devastating precision. Training instructions emphasized avoiding certain terrain features and movement patterns that had proven vulnerable to Australian ambush techniques. Major Beasley, by then a retired colonel living in Melbourne, read transcripts of enemy interviews with fascination that bordered on vindication. The tactical doctrine he had implemented against institutional resistance had achieved results that exceeded even his optimistic projections. 6-man patrols had controlled territory that conventional battalions could not secure, proving that psychological warfare through uncertainty could be more effective than destruction through overwhelming firepower. The mathematical evidence supporting enemy testimony appeared in declassified intelligence reports that documented changing VC behavior patterns throughout areas where SAS operated. Enemy movement during daylight hours decreased by 60% in provinces where Australian patrols conducted regular operations. Supply routes were abandoned or rerouted through terrain that added weeks to transportation schedules. Most significantly, VC forces began concentrating in larger groups for mutual protection, making them more vulnerable to detection by conventional Allied units. Davies, working as a security consultant in Brisbane, reviewed the enemy interviews with professional interest in how opponents had adapted to tactics that turned conventional wisdom upside down. The woman's description of comrades who simply vanished confirmed the effectiveness of methods that emphasized perfect positioning over rapid movement. SAS patrols had achieved the ultimate tactical goal, defeating enemies who never realized they were under attack until survival became impossible. The psychological impact extended beyond individual engagements to strategic effects that influenced enemy operational planning across South Vietnam. Intelligence documents revealed that VC commanders allocated significant resources to countering Australian SAS operations despite their relatively small numbers. Units that could have been deployed against larger American or South Vietnamese forces were instead assigned to provide security against phantom attacks that might never come. Watson, teaching military history at the Royal Military College Dun Trun, used enemy testimony to illustrate tactical principles that students struggled to understand through conventional military analysis. The woman's simple statement about hating forces that make comrades disappear contained more tactical wisdom than textbooks written about conventional warfare. Fear of the unknown proved more paralyzing than fear of superior firepower. The revelation's broader implications became apparent when military historians compared Australian SAS casualty ratios with similar units from other nations operating in Vietnam. American Special Forces, British SAS, and South Korean Special Operations units all suffered significantly higher losses while achieving fewer tactical successes than their Australian counterparts. The mathematical impossibility of 500 to 1 kill ratios became explicable only through enemy testimony that described tactical methods so effective they seemed supernatural. International military schools began studying Australian Vietnam tactics as examples of how small units could achieve disproportionate results through psychological warfare combined with superior fieldcraft. The Phantom Doctrine entered military curricula worldwide, influencing special operations training that emphasized patience over aggression, positioning over movement, and psychological impact over physical destruction. The woman's final comment provided the ultimate validation of tactical methods that had seemed impossible to conventional military thinking. When we heard the Australian SAS were leaving Vietnam, we celebrated like the war was over. Not because they killed so many of us, but because we could finally move through our own jungle without fear of soldiers we could never see coming. 23 years after the last helicopter extraction, 580 men who had achieved the impossible received recognition from the enemies who had feared them most. The quiet acknowledgement that phantom soldiers had controlled territory through invisible presence confirmed tactical genius that statistics alone could never convey. The lesson echoed through military history with mathematical precision. Sometimes the smallest force creates the largest impact when patience becomes its primary weapon and fear its most effective ammunition.